Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Baugh, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. The title of the program today solves a lot of problems. The title is Hugged by a Canopy. Medical researchers are finding that if a parent hugs the child a little more often than they're inclined to in our decadent generation, that child grows up with a lot more security. And between husbands and wives, there should be a lot more embracing going on, because it affects the entire metabolic system as well as the energy system of that individual, and it certainly affects the mental discipline and the projection of security for the future. Well, God had all of that in mind in His creation. Most creationists, not all, but most creationists certainly recognize that in the original creation, from Genesis chapter 1 all the way to the time of the flood, there was a canopy surrounding the earth. Many creationists envision that as being a vapor canopy. Other creationists, such as our particular model, envision that, taking the Hebrew words at their literal value, envision that as being a very thin crystalline canopy. Now, that canopy would have done a lot of things and would have solved a number of tremendous problems that we experience today. The canopy is no longer in place. It collapsed early in Noah's flood. Took approximately 40 days and nights, in fact exactly 40 days and nights for that to collapse, to rain down, and we're still living with the detrimental results of the loss of that canopy. We have a very special guest today who is multidisciplinary. He wears a lot of hats. He's on my staff, and he's a treasured member of the staff at the Creation Evidence Museum. We're going to talk about some of the problems that have arisen and some of the solutions that the original canopy certainly held in view in God's creation. And then we're going to check to see if the Bible really does support such a context. I'd like to welcome a dear friend and treasured colleague, Dr. Larry Mitchum. Larry, it's a pleasure to have you on the telecast again today.
Good to be back. This is going to be fun today.
Oh, I know it is. You're encouraged. I'm encouraged because people need some answers.
I think so.
There's some problems that have arisen due to faulty explanations. And if we don't have all of the increments lined up just right, the explanations just really don't hold water.
This is true.
Now, one of those you and I have been talking about. In fact, you have a background in physics and chemistry and engineering, and you have your PhD in special research studies in the Bible. But you have how many graduate hours from secular university that involves chemistry, engineering, and physics?
Undergraduate hours, I have about 240. And then I went to grad school beyond that and took a little time to do that. So I either wasted a lot of money or I never figured out what I needed to be or wanted to be, but it was fun and interesting, I'll say that.
Well, let me help to solve that. Let me just ask you a question. You are involved intimately in the research and actually the physical dimensions of the Creation Evidence Museum. In fact, you're the head engineer in the hyperbaric biosphere. I wish this audience could see the tremendous computerized system designed by a man who holds 16 patents, one of the head engineers for Texas Instruments for how many years?
About 17 years with Texas Instruments.
17 years, and then with Samsung, how many years did you spend?
I worked about 8 years as a private consultant with Samsung and Sharp Electronics.
He has applied all of that in designing for us the monitoring system, the control system for all of the 8 parameters that we're putting into the hyperbaric biosphere, and we've been monitoring those by hand. And some of the outstanding breakthroughs in history, physics and chemistry, have been hand monitored, but it's so nice to be able to recall all that data and print it out. Larry, you've done a wonderful job with this electronic gear.
Well, I've had a lot of help, I'll say that.
Well, and a lot of that's been divine help as well.
Absolutely.
And you, of course, have had a lot of other consultants, very fine scientists and technicians working with you and helping to make all that possible.
It takes a team.
Now, so here's the question. In this work at the Creation Evidence Museum, haven't you really called upon all of those disciplines that you spent decades of study at secular universities acquiring?
Oh, absolutely. It's all coming into place now. It's all starting to fit. It's like we're seeing the reason for the madness. It's beautiful.
Well, I think from before the foundation of the world, God knew and had all of this designed. This is exciting. Now, back to the problem. You and I both in the past have embraced evolution.
That's correct.
We do not currently embrace evolution.
And that was a strain. Trying to ride the evolutionary horse and ride the Christian horse and read the book of the Bible and believe and study and learn and believe in both at the same time was confusing and conflicting.
And that generates chaos in the very mindset of the individual. Now, let's explain just a bit. Larry and I both agree that within genetic boundaries, there certainly are variations. If you want to call that microevolution, that is no problem. That's all within genetic boundary. But the addition of new information producing an entirely new life form is absolutely impossible. Now, let's get to the problem that the evolutionary community has generated for us, and it has to do with some of the benefits of the canopy that the evolutionary community just ignores altogether. Some of the explanations for the great creatures we call the dinosaurs. Larry, you work a lot in your physics and your chemistry and your engineering. You know a lot about pressure and chambers and saturation. What about the lungs of the great dinosaurs?
They're not as big in proportion as our lungs are per body weight. Not only that, to their detriment, some have tremendously long airways, which they have to pull this oxygenated air through, and it must return in all exhaust before the next breath can come in. In addition to that, some, like the Apatosaurus, the larger sauropods, have nostrils no larger than a racehorse, no larger than a quarter horse, a 600 or 700 pound animal, and they are trying to oxygenate, in some cases, 80,000 pounds of mass of meat and blubber and
Yes,
blood.
40 tons.
Yes.
And the hydraulics involved as well, which would require a tremendous amount of metabolic oxygen being consumed. Okay, continue.
So where have they all gone? And we think perhaps this oxygen riddle has a lot to do with that. Now, below this picture, and that's what's now known as an Apatosaurus, this artist's conception was of a Brontosaurus, wrongly called, before they put the right head on it.
Yes.
And I learned that from you and the dig team. The explanation below talks about the requirements calculated for this animal to even lumber along.
Now, the audience needs to get this. This is a major problem, and the evolutionary community has not addressed it at all. So go ahead, in order to get sufficient oxygen, go ahead with what you were saying.
Okay, with nostril breathing and even supplemented mouth breathing. That means he has to stop eating and breathe through his mouth, like a lot of us do today. And we have suffered from oxygen deprivation as well.
Yes.
We're no different than the rest of the animals. He could at best have lumbered along with this kind of mass in a 35% atmosphere, been calculated by many. So the summary on this slide is that perhaps the original oxygen in the atmosphere was something like 40% or even better.
Now that's a major problem. So the evolutionary community has suggested that in order to
match the track set velocities
Yes.
that we've measured in the fossil record.
and counterbalance this,
Right.
in order to do that, the atmospheric ratio of oxygen saturation must have been around 40%. But that's a major problem.
You've
and
got
they
an
really
Apollo
have
1 problem there.
You have an Apollo 1 problem. So, Larry, not only do we have that, as we're going to talk about in a moment, for the great creatures we call the dinosaurs, but we have it for other creatures as well.
Well, now, most of the big creatures disappeared after the canopy, which you eloquently explained about earlier, fell, and we lost all of whatever that canopy supplied to us, except a few managed to survive, and one is the magnificent blue whale.
Do you have any idea why he could survive when those great dinosaurs did not survive?
He has two advantages. One, he dives and lives in cold water.
Why is cold water important?
Well, we'll go to a graph in just a second.
All right.
Okay? But the colder water is, the more propensity it has for holding oxygen in soluble content. As you heat it up, that goes away. And in fact, at near boiling temperatures, there is no propensity for holding oxygen at all. It just starts going out. It's just flat. He has cold water, and in addition, when he takes a breath, he submerges to the depths and pressurizes that, and that helps to push it into solubility in his bloodstream.
Vitally important, because at Texas A&M University, they found that if you double the atmospheric pressure, you triple the assimilation of available oxygen.
That is correct.
So gulping the air in the atmosphere and diving is necessary for him to saturate the deep cell tissue with oxygen.
Right.
So now, the evolutionary community has found some partial solutions. Would you explain the significance of this particular photo?
Well, I'm sure most of our audience has seen the movie Jurassic Park many times. And in the movie, they focused on the little animals in the amber. I have a piece of it here. My wife loaned me this. This is out of safety deposit, so I have to be careful with this. This one not only has a few insect pieces in it, but has some huge air bubbles inside, as does our photograph here. Now, think about it. The air bubble is a tiny ampule that could have been used for collecting, this is what would be prehistoric gas.
Now, let's let the audience hold that still for a moment so the audience can see. That's a jewel for your wife, and she wears it gracefully and graciously. And so you have an insect in there, you have bubbles and air all trapped in amber. Okay, continue.
Okay, now, with a QMS gas chromatograph.
Now, what does that mean?
Well, that's a quadrupole mass spectrography type chromatograph, which means it has plates in it that eliminate the gases you don't want to study. That way you isolate the particular gas you're looking for, and you can get tremendously accurate data on that gas in particular and not see all the rest of them. They have determined, okay, and most of this work was done by Gary Landis.
Yes.
Others have followed with similar results, that the oxygen content in the gas was superior to what it is today. However, due to the variability in the readings, you can't really make a definite conclusion about the exact percentage of oxygen that was around at the time prior to the flood.
So what do they estimate? Dr. Landis and I've read his work, so what's the estimate on
the average runs around 30%. They range from 25 to 35%.
Okay.
Oxygen.
And
which, you know, 35 is bordering on volatility.
That's correct.
There's a danger there.
So let's go to the charts that you have provided for us for the program today to show you why the evolutionary model does not really address all the issues.
Okay, here is a chart of some various aquatic animals, starting on the left with the trout, the North American trout, which needs a tremendous amount of oxygen in the water to survive and thrive. Now, he can exist in lower oxygen levels like some of these other species can. We have the smallmouth bass, the mayfly larva, the stonefly larva, the catfish, which we have down in the south here where we don't have cold waters. You see why he thrives here. We have the carp, takes a little more oxygen, and then we have the mosquito, which takes almost no oxygen. Isn't that surprising? To thrive and survive in stagnant waters. Now, looking at this content, that's over 6 milligrams per liter of oxygen required to keep a trout alive and thriving in the waters. Do you understand now why we don't have any in the Paluxy River?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, looking at the chart below, taking these same numbers down here, you can see, and again, this is in water, a similar solution to blood, which is a very high percentage of water.
Yes.
We are approximately 71% water, give or take, depending on hydration. You can see...
the blood level is higher than that, even.
That is correct. You can see that we're gaining, at our current present situation, of 20.9% oxygen from about 4.4 grams per liter up to the required 6. To get the fish happy, you require 30% oxygen in air. Again, this chart is at 25 degrees centigrade. This water is obviously much colder than that. That's why you can't have the trout in room temperature water. Doesn't solve the problem. You go on up, 35% oxygen, 7.3, 40% oxygen. Now this is getting into real volatility.
Yes, the evolutionary community has not addressed the issue of having that kind of ratio of oxygen, which they state would be required for the metabolism of the great dinosaurs.
Right.
But that generates a volatile context. So we believe the solution is actually here.
About 25% oxygen, which is supported by the Landis research and others. And if you'll simply boost the pressure, the atmospheric pressure, Henry's law will push that same percentage up to 10.5 at room temperature.
Now, the practical application of this is profound. At the time of the Canopy, prior to the flood, at that time, due to the fact that the diameter of the earth was slightly smaller and we had the envelope or enveloping canopy approximately 10 miles above the earth, very, very thin canopy, but providing an envelope, all of the factors give us a ratio of saturation so that you do not need the 40% or the 35% or even the 30%. We're working at around 25% with at least 50% humidity, and that completely removes the angle of volatility. We believe the creation model is far superior. But now, Larry, the big question. One of the areas where you have done tremendous research that is world-class in scope, in addition to the other very fine research that you've done, this area has to do with the Bible codes. You've been able to ferret out information, not that the codes voluntarily give this information, but you've been able to program and see if that information is in the Scriptures. Now, let's look at a chart that you've done having to do with the canopy. Now, let's explain in a thumbnail sketch what we're talking about in the Bible codes. The Hebrew rabbis have known for centuries, or have declared for centuries, that they, being very conversant with the Hebrew language, were able to detect that at skip sequences, the names of God and the names of patriarchs and vital things were found. At skip sequences are encoded below the surface text giving the same concept, but that text giving in encoded form a tremendous amount of additional data. Now, Jesus said, not one jot or tittle of the word will pass till all be fulfilled. That suggestion is, and I didn't know how to explain that or comprehend it for decades of research in the biblical record, that suggestion is that all things are probably in the Scriptures. How could all things be in the Scriptures? Well, Larry, you've done a tremendous job.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Stood on the shoulders of many.
Well, we all do. No man is an island. And you've done a wonderful job. Again, we emphasize you cannot fortune tell with the Bible codes.
Absolutely.
The program was designed at Hebrew University, and we take advantage of that. And it's the Masoretic text in the Hebrew. And you simply, knowing the Hebrew quite well, are able to program a concept or a word or a name and see if it comes up, and see if it comes up in a cluster. So now, that being involved, would you take it from there and give us a thumbnail sketch of what you have found related to that canopy suspended above the earth prior to the flood?
Okay, let me give you a 25-cent background on how this slide came to be. We first gave the computer equal parameter of all the books in the Bible. We did not tell it where to look.
That's important.
Okay, we looked in all of what's called the Tanakh. All right, that's the Hebrew word for the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Everything from Genesis to the Malachi. We then listed some of the key elements that we thought were important in our canopy model. And that would be things like magnetic, things like frequency, things like light, things like transparent, shield, canopy, crystalline, things like rakia, the Hebrew word itself, things like creation. We also look for Adam, Eve, Noah, and Abraham. Okay?
Nice.
Now, this beautiful cluster came in at an extremely low skip rate. And for you in the audience out there that have code search programs, you can replicate this. It is at skip rate 24. And it came in the book of Genesis, chapter 1.
That's incredible. Now, we would have been pleased had it been in Psalms, because there are a lot of
Much
references to creation
there.
That's right. Or Exodus, or Deuteronomy, or Joshua, or Judges, or the Kings, or Daniel, which has to do with a lot of creation statement, or Job. But incredibly, it came in the very first chapter where that canopy
and in only a very few
mentioned.
verses. Only the first 17 verses.
Marvelous.
All of this is contained.
Give us more.
Well, your name is here. Now, I know you didn't ask us to look for that.
I didn't. That
but
surprised
this model was pretty much your suggestion. I mean, you are one of the few people, maybe the only person I know with this particular model mindset. There are others that have different versions of the creation model.
Yes.
In addition to that, we found waters, we found the trees, we found the word smell, sweet smell, we found song, light, pleasant, earth, knowledge, we found the word pink. Remember the light,
now
the 6365 nanometer light?
Yes.
That seems to be especially good for growing plant life and relaxing the mind. We found plant, we found transparent, we found flood. Okay, that's in Genesis chapter 1, verse 12. We found behemoth.
Because the flood actually destroyed this canopy.
That's correct. We found the word oxygen, and we found the word hydrogen. We found serpent coming right down through here in the yellow. We found a shield. We found the word Jesus many times.
Marvelous.
Metallic, rakia, restoration, and harmonize. We found Abraham, creation, sweet, Noah, right here in the gray. We found Eve right there in the pink, and wouldn't you know it, just beside Eve's name is man, and the word Adam is crossing man, making a little four-cornered star right there.
This was the beatific world, the ecosphere in which God created them to live.
That is correct.
And to enjoy Him and all His creation. Now, that's going to be restored in the future. I'm so sorry we
The word
don't have it now.
restoration is there.
Restoration, isn't that encouraging? That's wonderfully encouraging. So I'm encouraged with the work that you've done, the world-class work that you've done on this canopy. And this certainly gives strong credence to the fact that these data are written into the original creation that God designed.
That's correct.
And since behemoth is there, that solves the problem. Now, we come to this great behemoth, the dinosaur. In fact, in Job chapter 40, verses 15 through 23, behemoth is described.
The behemoth, whom I created with thee.
With thee, with man. And then behemoth is described physically in latter verses as having bones like bars of iron. Most of the creatures that we observe have partially hollow bones, but his are like bars of iron.
We know this from lifting them out.
Yes.
They can weigh tons.
You helped to do that.
Yes, sir.
In addition to that, he's called the chief of the ways of God. So behemoth is found in the word code here in
and
Genesis
he also has a
chapter
tail
1.
of cedar.
A tail like a cedar tree
Which
sweeping.
an ox or a hippopotamus does not have.
That's correct. So the answer to behemoth, the dinosaur, is not in the evolutionary model, but in the creation model. Because with his small lung ratio, Texas A&M, again, found that if you double the atmospheric pressure, and that's what those conditions would have done, if you double the atmospheric pressure, you triple the assimilation of available oxygen. So here this creature of the whales would not have to dive deeply.
Right.
This creature would not have to be lethargic. He could be totally virile because he could get the full oxygen saturation to the deep cell tissue of his body. Creation science is far superior to evolutionary science.
Amen.
So, what we've talked about today is being hugged by a canopy. God designed life on earth to be corollary with all of life on earth. For instance, one of the major problems we have today is the buildup of anaerobic bacteria. But if you have 2 atmospheres of pressure with 25 or so % oxygen, that eliminates the anaerobic bacteria. Gangrene has been a major problem, and cuts and wounds that would not heal. But under hyperbaric oxygen, they heal very readily and very quickly. So this solves a lot of problems. But the title of the program is Hugged by a Canopy. God has embraced mankind physically in His design. He's created it for the security of mankind, for the happiness of mankind. Larry mentioned the pink. The sky would have glowed a gentle pink because of the saturation of hydrogen in this very thin crystalline canopy, and thus we would have that gentle pink color generated. When you look at pink, there are some studies indicating that the brain generates norepinephrine. You're able to think clearer, think better, and be more peaceful all at the same time. God designed that for man. But of course, man violated the mercy and the will of God. Man sinned. He violated the moral code of God. So in his fall, he introduced death to the entire creation. Death came by sin. The book of Romans is very clear about that. We envision long generations, long eras and epochs of evolutionary time of death and destruction until man finally arrived. But that is not what the biblical record states. And if death did not originate because of sin, then all of those creatures can be explained in dying. But if death did originate by sin, how do you explain the death of all of those creatures? The Bible really makes sense. But in order to fully understand it, in order to fully appreciate it, you need to know the author. You need to have a discussion with him. And that discussion should begin with a prayer. This prayer, pray it with me. Dear God, I know that I'm a sinner. I know I have violated your will, but I want peace in my heart, and I want forgiveness for my sin. Dear God, right now, I thank you for providing Jesus to die for my sins. And right now, I open my heart to Jesus. Lord Jesus, come in right now. I know you're the Son of God. I know you died for me. I want you in my heart. Come in and save me forever. I'll live for you with all my heart. I trust you prayed that prayer. If so, God himself, in the person of his Son, entered your heart and mind and life and eternity. I trust that you've received some instruction and some encouragement, because creation science is far better science.